joined. We're having an official debate. We have Deonteleologist here, Footsoldier. For this debate, Deonteleologist is holding the proposition that there are objects that do not exist. Footsoldier is taking the opposition. As always, one will be based upon who concedes. No concessions made. You, the audience, can vote on who you think performed better overall in the debate. No time limit. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, so maybe we should just establish the debate proposition. Dion, maybe you should make a case if you'd like, and then I'll address that.
Sounds good. So my case is based on certain sentences and certain ways we use language, and they are fundamentally based on appeals to intuition about certain things, because of words like being and existence and phrases like there is an X and X exists, because these phrases are, there's no clear univocal definition of these terms, right? It's at least not obvious what such definitions would be. Then it's at least plausible that they could have distinct definitions. Or, that even putting it that way makes it sound a little too realist in some sense. I don't think that, there's a fact of the matter what the word being means versus what the word existence means. I think ultimately we're going to have to decide how we use these terms. And I do think that there can be legitimate philosophical reasons to posit this distinction, and that the way that I try to cash them out tracks our intuitive understandings of being and existence enough, and to the point that it is plausible. So even if I'm not going to be able to accommodate every single intuition about what exists, what I would say in response to that is like, well, we can use existence and being in the casual senses when we're not in the philosophy room, but for philosophical purposes, and specifically in this debate, I'm going to use it a specific way. So I take inspiration from Meinong. I'm going to use the word existence for actually, before I say that, I'm gonna just try to motivate the view a little bit. For instance, I think it's true that SpongeBob SquarePants is a fictional character, and SpongeBob SquarePants is a talking sponge. I also think it's true that SpongeBob SquarePants does not exist. So the intuition is supposed to be that, right, SpongeBob doesn't exist. Greek gods, creatures of fiction in general don't exist, but that doesn't mean that we can't speak truthfully about them, right? It doesn't mean that Zeus is not a Greek god, a god of Greek mythology. It doesn't mean SpongeBob's not a talking sponge. So, but if being and existing are sort of the same thing as this typically is, I would say that this is probably like the mainstream view in analytic, I guess you would call it meta-ontology these days, since basically Russell, Frege, and Quine, giants in the field, all thought that being and existing were pretty much the same thing. Although actually, there were a few years where Russell started to sound like a Meinongian, but it's beside the point. So, so that's one thing to motivate the view is like, we can't say that SpongeBob is a fictional character or that SpongeBob is a talking sponge if there's no such thing as SpongeBob, right? And on the traditional view, to say that SpongeBob doesn't exist would be basically just to say that there's no such thing as SpongeBob. So I think, one intuitive domain in which this view applies pretty well would be fictional characters. Then there are other kinds of abstract objects, right? Like, it at least makes sense to ask whether numbers exist, right? Like, do numbers exist? Do they really exist? On this view, I would say no, they don't strictly speaking exist, but of course that there are numbers, right? And we can speak truthfully about them. Every number has an infinite number of properties that we can truly attribute to it. And it doesn't follow from their not existing that, we can't speak truthfully about them, right? So like the number 7 doesn't exist, but there is such a thing as the number 7. And then finally, so other abstract objects would count too. And then finally, I think it helps us in the domain of previous, like no longer existing entities that did exist, such as Plato. I think it's true that Plato wrote the Republic, but if Plato doesn't exist, and if being and existence are identical, we would seem forced to say that there's no such thing as Plato, or that there's no such thing as the author of the Republic. And it's even more difficult. Like there are ways of using the metaphysics of tense to get around that problem that I don't know whether we can satisfactorily get around in the case of posthumous attribution. So it's true that Walt Disney won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film in 1966, but he was dead. So if he didn't exist at the time, as that's how we typically talk about, dead people, is that they no longer exist. Their body might still exist for however long we want to say that their body exists, but they don't exist. And I just don't know how we can say that Walt Disney won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short in 1966 if there's no such thing as Walt Disney. So yeah, these are like the main things motivating the view. The basic way I'm using the terms is existence would be a subset of being. So I use the word ontological to refer to the broad category of being, and I would use existential to talk about existence. In particular, I see existence as sort of being in space time. That's typically, I think, I mean, I haven't encountered cases otherwise, that basically physical and psychological entities exist. And for any other entity, if it doesn't exist because it's an entity, then it is, right? If it were not, then we wouldn't talk about it being at all. So that might be a little a little confusing, but at this point I've said enough to get started and see what Footsoldier's got to say.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like you've made a really good introductory statement to establish the proposition as something very interesting. I'm not sure if it holds up though, and so I'm going to try and argue for the negation of the proposition. And I really feel like what you said there, contained within your opening statement, was some lack of clarity or haziness, fuzziness in respect to what we actually mean by being, existence, and these types of things. It's almost like there's you have to posit your own definition, or you have to sort of pluck something out of the air on, or settle on something. So I really like to get a bit more clarity in these things, and I think one of the ways we can do that is by just throwing the proposition into the context of predicate calculus and just seeing what that would spit out. And if we did do that, I think what we see is something to the degree of there exists an X which does not exist. And this seems to be contradictory, right? So on that basis, I'd say, from my understanding of the debate proposition, from my view, the way that I see it, the debate proposition itself is absurd. And all of these consequences that have come out of your introductory statement, saying problems with the existence of Walt Disney and Plato, and all of these other things. That seems for me just to arise out of a confusion which is contingent on linguistic-based intuition, right? So it just because it's intuitive from our language, it seems to portray, or it seems to generate just as much confusion in these matters as our language generates confusion for dualism, Cartesian type dualism, right? Because our language is inherently dualistic. So when I talk about I can't help but say the word I in order to refer to the being that is myself. Like I need these words. Our language is dualistic. I can't really converse in a proper functional way without using dualistic concepts of language. But that doesn't therefore mean that there's a little man inside my head and Cartesian dualism is true. It doesn't mean that there is some dualism of matter, that there's a mind, spirit, or body, distinct entities that exist on in different planes of reality or different realms of reality. That doesn't follow just because it's intuitively the case, as indicated by my language. It doesn't follow that it's necessarily true. So what I'd like to do is systematically untangle your confusion in a Wittgensteinian way, and in a Wittgensteinian sense of untangling confusion, and go through and demonstrate how perhaps this is just a result of confusion, right? So what would you say to putting the debate proposition into predicate calculus form, right? Would you agree that it would give us something like there exists an X which does not exist, or would you take issue with that?
No, so I think that the reason that so many people think that that has to follow is just because when we're talking about the terminology we have in predicate logic, is we use the existential quantifier, we use that label for what I think we really mean more plausibly as the ontological quantifier. And most people, Quine and Frege, probably would see those as just synonyms. But I think, you talked about Wittgensteinian intuitions and reasons and ways of understanding language. I think that my approach is broadly Wittgensteinian. I think, I look at language as a sort of practice of a community. I see how do we use these terms, and is there any way of trying to cash out a more specific function for these terms as tools in some sense for philosophical purposes that aren't immediately obvious in just ordinary discourse. And so, I mean, if you want to say that, like, you just see the existential quantifier as the same thing as what I would call the ontological quantifier, then you can say that. It seems, though, then we're going to have to start being really specific about what we can actually put into predicate logic and what we can actually start to quantify about. Because I think sometimes we might even do it unnaturally or without thinking, is because, I mean, we sort of just go back and forth between expressing the existential quantifier as there exists an X, or there is an X, or even just for some X. So I think that there are these different senses there. And I mean, what I'm saying is, look, we have when we ask a question like, do abstract objects exist? Part of the problem, or at least part of the nominalist intuition that we have, if you have that nominalist intuition, is like, well, if they exist, like, where the fuck would they be? Like, I've never seen the number 6. I've never seen any numbers. I've never seen properties, right? I've seen copies of Plato's Republic, but I've never seen Plato's Republic itself, right? I've only seen copies of it. And these are just the sort of things that couldn't exist in space-time. And so I think that we have this sort of association with space-time and the term existence, and that's part of what drives the anomalous intuition. So it's partly like you can have your cake and eat it too. I think I've said enough here. I mean, just in terms of like you have the ontological quantifier or the existential quantifier, and I think if you want to assume the other, then we'll just be talking past each other.
Sure. I feel like I just need to systematically wreck the Meinongian bullshit, which you seem to be tangled up in. And I think the way that we can do that most effectively is just with definite descriptions, right? I know you've made some arguments against definite descriptions, but I like to just explore them because I don't think the problems arise where you think. I don't think the problems that you're pointing out are real problems. I think you're just pointing to things that may be slightly unintuitive because our language tends to lead us um, to think in certain ways, like as I've already mentioned, in a Cartesian way, when it's not necessarily true that dualism is true.
Wait, do you think that my Meinongianism commits me to Cartesianism?
No, I'm just drawing an analogy, right,
Okay,
between
just making sure, right?
linguistic intuition, right? So we've got linguistic intuition of dualism through because that's just the way that we speak, right? Especially in the English language. And then we have this equivalent or at least analogous sense of intuition in subsistence. But I really think that subsistence is just an elusive weird concept that when we actually try and get into it, we just find that we might just be talking bullshit, like in the technical sense of bullshit, right? Not in a derogatory sense, in a sense of we are talking about something which doesn't have any real meaning that we can pin down, but we talk about it anyway, and at without really trying to question what this is all about. Because if we just look at the definite descriptions of, say, some fantasy objects or something that you're saying subsists, we can just say that it's the definite description. That's a word which you've uttered, but it's just not obtaining to anything, right? What it's denoting just it doesn't exist. It's nonsense, right? It has no meaning. It has no sense. A Wittgensteinian sense of nonsense, right? So that it's just not sensical, right?
Okay, can because I want to just make sure I know what you mean when you use these terms. So what do you mean by existence when you're using these terms?
Well, just the sense that we both agree upon, I guess, existence. Something exists. So if I say that my hands exist, in the same sense that my hands exist, something can exist, and same way that a document or a letter can exist, or words on a page.
So are you using it in a materialist or physicalist sense?
Not necessarily, right? Because you wouldn't even
Okay.
limit yourself to materialism to have hands. Right? Idealists can also have
No, right,
hands.
right, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I just don't see the problems. Like you were saying about Walt Disney, and we can just say, okay, well, it was the company Walt Disney, and not it wasn't. We're not awarding the actual person, unless that was the case, but or
Well,
inducting people
it's the
into the
person.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. So yeah, in the case of the actual person and not the company, or in case of just like inducting people into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, for example, which is an analogous example, I guess, which is more familiar to me. Um, we're not going to say that the person in existence has been inducted, and we're not going to say the person who doesn't exist has been inducted, right? We're just saying the person who used to exist, and you seem to make some sort of fleeting reference to the fact that we use tenses to get around that problem, and I don't even feel like it's getting around a problem. We just do use tenses. Like, without having tenses in our language, how do we communicate
No,
intention
I'm
or
not
what?
denying that we have tenses.
Right, yeah, so we just simply use tenses. Like Walt Disney or John Lennon or whoever it was, who is now dead and doesn't exist, is not subsisting somewhere unless you're committed to some sort of.
Well, you keep using
Yes.
somewhere, and that's the thing about subsistence is it's completely divorced from space-time.
Yeah, well, it just doesn't make any sense. It just seems to be just the
Why
literal
doesn't it
sense,
make
like
sense?
nonsense. It's just to me, it's just nonsense. It doesn't make sense. It lacks sense. There's no sense to say that something exists outside of space time. There's no outside of
I
time
didn't say
space
it exists, right?
continuity.
But
So,
um,
not exist,
it,
but subsistence is some other mode of existence or like some secondary type of existence, and
no,
that I
it's
just
not.
don't understand.
No. There's not two kinds of existence. There are two kinds of being:
How can you
existence and
be?
subsistence.
How can you be and not exist? I just think there's
Oh
conflation
well. So I
between
mean,
being
this
and.
is what I think. This is what I think. In order to have any properties, an entity must be.
Uh, it doesn't. I don't really understand what you mean there. It just
So like
doesn't.
if it's so when you say an entity must be, let's say that the entity's x, right? For have any properties, there must be an x,
Sure, you cut
right?
out a bit, but I think I
So
understand
it's
the
like
gist
the
of what you're
sense
saying.
is that being is a sort of fundamental property that you can't have any property unless you have being, right? Does that make sense? Because I mean, try to think of something that has a property that, but you would also say there's no such thing as that thing. It just that seems like clearly violates the law of non-contradiction to me.
I don't really see how this is a problem. Are you trying to bring up
No,
some
I'm just trying
bundle
to
theory?
motivate my view first of like, this is because you're like you're telling me you don't know what I mean by being, so I'm trying to just sort of get the ball rolling.
Sure. Are you trying to invoke some sort of bundle theory idea here from
I don't
Hume?
know what you mean by bundle theory.
Yeah. So David Hume put forth his concept of, I think, what you're trying to explain in a similar way. Bundle theory, essentially, there is no object in of itself, like in the Kantian sense of das Ding an sich. There's only properties, right? So you can't think of an object without its properties. That's basically bundle theory. Is that what you're trying to get at here?
I would say you can't think of an object that is propertyless. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you could.
Right. Yeah.
So, but shifting from like, you can't think of an object having any property unless you think that the object is. Unless you think that there is such an object, not in the existence sense, not has to be space time or anything, or I just don't know, like, because if you say that X has a certain property F, but there is no such thing as X, right? X does not exist, nor does X subsist, then you're going to have to say that there is an X and that there is not an X.
Well, if you're wedded to the idea of subsistence, we can just think about the amount of monsters that must subsist under my bed. All of the green monsters, the red monsters.
You're equivocating here because subsistence is outside of space time.
Or what if
It's divorced from space time.
But what if my understanding of the monster under my bed entails it being under my bed? Then it can't subsist in your view?
No, I mean, my definition of subsistence is that it's divorced from space time. So I
So
mean,
what
there could.
what does that even mean to say that there is a subsistent entity that it is part of the understanding of this is that it's a monster under my bed, right? And this is the classic fictional object, which the Meinonian sort of fictional object, right? Right.
It's
But if
question
it's under
begging.
my bed, yeah, no, but the subsistence is directly in relation to the monster under my bed. So if I'm thinking about a monster under my bed, like many kids do, and we're gonna subscribe some sort of subsistence, to this entity or this whatever you want to call that is. Like how many are under my bed? Like,
No,
and you're saying what
yeah.
it transcends space time? It's
No,
like,
no,
but it's under my
no.
bed. So how does it
So
subsist?
what we can say is that there is something that you imagine to be under your bed, and it's the thought of it's the sort of fictional character you imagine to be under your bed. It doesn't entail that it's under your bed. It's imagined by you to be under your bed. That's not a space-time property.
But I'm invoking concepts which are contingent on space time, right? My bed is the
Yeah,
predominant one,
you
right?
are right, but like so is J.K. Rowling when she writes Harry Potter, and we talk about Harry Potter. Harry Potter wearing glasses. That's in some sense that's a space time thing. The glasses have to be above his nose. They can't be floating off his head. That's a space time thing too, but it's no more problematic.
But if you're just gonna say, oh well, my idea of something that subsists transcends space time, then you're just going to run into problems with objecthood. So you're saying that objects, non-existent objects, there can be some being, there can be some subsistence of non-existent objects. So if we're going to say that these objects transcend space-time, then you're going to have a huge problem with objecthood, because objecthood is contingent on the understanding of space-time. So how do you even have objecthood in your world of
What you
subsistence?
mean objecthood? I'm thinking more like object sounds physicalist to me, but I'm thinking in terms of like entities. Like it's weird to say that the number 3 is an object, but
Yeah, sure, it's nonsense.
I mean, you don't think that there's no such thing as the number 3, do you?
Well, in my language, when I talk about mathematics or I count money or something like this, and it's something that I do as part of the language game of doing that, it doesn't mean that it exists or it doesn't exist, or it is just nonsense to say that the number 3 subsists in some ways. It just seems ridiculous. What, do all of the numbers subsist? Does infinite amount of numbers subsist? How many numbers subsist? And you can say, oh,
There are infinitely many numbers, aren't there?
so there's an infinite subsistence of numbers. So what does this? It just seems like an unparsimonious, weird thing to say, that there's this subsistence realm of infinite things.
So you think you can do better? You can have as much explanatory adequacy without needing any such things as properties, relations, numbers, meanings, any of these things?
Well, you're conflating two things, right? You're
Well,
conflating
those are all
utility.
abstract.
No. But what I'm saying is you're conflating utility with whether something is the case or not, right? So if something's useful, this is just like some sort of pragmatist thing now you're going down. You're saying if something's useful, then it's true. So that's like a William James type thing to say that
Didn't
something
say that.
is.
No, I would never
Well,
say that.
that's tacitly implied by your position, right? Because if you are saying that, oh, well, it has explanatory power and it's got some sort of utility linguistically to
No, this is
have this.
just like a general desire of, like, when you talk about parsimony, you want, like, when you apply Occam's razor doesn't just say pick whatever theory is more parsimonious, because then I could just be a monist, a complete monist, and I wouldn't need anything else. Or I could just be a complete nihilist. That might even be more parsimonious. Occam's razor doesn't tell me just to go for parsimony alone. It says, given two theories that have, um, you know,
Equal
to the relevant,
explanatory power.
pretty much, yeah, explanatory power, um, go with the more parsimonious one.
Yeah, sure. And that's what I'm offering. I'm offering a world without infinite beings or whatever you want to call it in your realm of subsistence. It just, yeah, I can explain the way that we communicate without invoking some mystical realm, such as Plato's store cupboard or whatever subsistence realm or whatever type realm you're envisioning. It just sounds like confusion.
So, I mean, presumably we have to get rid of like all abstracta, no? Because I mean, if the problem's with there being infinitely many of, say, numbers, I mean, there are going to be infinitely many properties, relations, all sorts of
Uh,
things.
well, I don't really see how that really follows, right? Because yeah, we can just use definite descriptions. So I'm offering you like a Russellian theory accounts for these things, and it's not really difficult to envision how we can explain things without invoking mystical realms. All right. So my theory, we can just we just have proper nouns and definite descriptions, and we can talk about the same things. We can say some things are sensical, some things are nonsensical, some things are trivially true, some things are trivially false or vacuously true. We don't need to then invoke mystical realms.
Yeah, I mean, so could you give me an example of something where you're employing an abstract object, but you don't think that it commits you ontologically to anything,
Yeah,
right?
well,
Like, go with like one of the more like something um, like numbers or something like
or
properties
J.K.
or
Rowling or something
relations.
like like fictional characters in a book or something like this. Do you want?
I mean, that's like the easiest case for sure. I
Right,
don't doubt that we can have plausible fictionalist paraphrases, but I
right.
don't
So
think we can at
so
all with the past tense
right. So
cases.
if you yourself agree, or I don't know if you concede, but probably just agree that there's a plausible account without invoking mystical realms, then that is a case of Occam's razor, cutting out the unparsimonious explanation, right? And then we would be um, arguing against the debate proposition. And if you specifically want a numerical example, I I don't really see any problems to begin with, right? So if I've got like 3 objects on my desk which exist in reality, like actual objects, and I say, look, I've got a pen, I've got a book, and I've got a cup, and that's 1, 2, 3 things. There exist 3 things on my desk. I don't then need to additionally say that 3 exists as some or subsists in some realm. Like that just seems like an unnecessary step of nonsense in between, right?
Can you then maintain, for instance, that 3 is greater than 2? And how would
Well,
you do that?
well, if I have 3 things on my, if I have $300, then this is a larger amount of money than $200, right? So using dollars and just indexing.
You don't have the concept, right? You can't have the concept because then you're going to have the abstract entity. So you're just going to be going off of um, like you can only believe that 3 is greater than 2 in some inductive sense.
Wait, if I've got $300, it buys me more shit than it buys me if I've got 200. What's wrong with that?
Well, this time it does, but you don't have the concept of 3 or 2. You can't. So I mean, you can't be. It's not conceptually true. It's not an a priori truth that 3 is greater than 2 on your view.
Well, if I've got bits of paper in front of me, I've got 1 bit of paper, 2 bits of paper, 3 bits of paper. I can just visually, I can perceive visually that it's more.
Yeah.
Unless you want to
In that
deny me,
case, yeah.
and unless
No,
you want
yeah,
to say,
you
oh,
can.
I can't use more as a concept because more must now exist in or like, subsist in some mystical realm. That just sounds like more
Well,
nonsense.
there's a relation, right?
Well,
More, greater than.
yeah. Well, in the case of numbers, it's a relation as well, but I can just visually see it's just evident, right? Not everything
You can't see
which
the
is
relation itself. You can see the two quantities, but you can't see
sure
the relation itself.
sure seeing the relation itself would just be more an example of more nonsense that
I don't
would just
think you can
be
see them either.
un
That's why I say they're outside spacetime.
sure, but that's not something that I necessarily need like I don't think did I say if I said that I didn't mean that I require the ability to see relations. I just mean like we just because we can see a quantity, it doesn't mean that the quantity itself, the concept, the abstract concept of 3 subsists in some parallel reality or some whatever subsistence means for you. Just to me, I'm a bit repetitive here, but it just seems
Well,
like
I mean, you just have to
unparsimonious.
concede. You just have to concede that if I ask you, is the number 3 greater than the number 2? You say either I don't know or no.
Wait, why do I need to do that? I just have from memory with working when I work with.
No, because you only have quantities. So you could say that, $300 is more than $200. You could say 3 cups is more than 2 cups, but you can't talk about the number 3 or the number 2, can you?
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't see how you can.
We just index it to carrots. That's how children do it. Like when we grow up as children, in primary, elementary school, whatever you call it over there, it's like 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. We don't say just the abstract concepts in themselves. We index it to sheep and to carrots and to apples because children can conceptualize apples, but they can't conceptualize subsistent things which don't exist. It's nonsensical. That's why the children
I
can't
got you. You
conceptualize
keep
it.
saying it's nonsensical. It's okay. I mean, you can say it all you want, but um, I don't know how many people are going to share the intuition that the claim that a number is greater than another number is nonsensical.
Well,
And
wait.
well, I mean, so like the claim is the proposition is this: the number 3 is greater than the number 2, and if you want to answer that based on just sort of abstracting from all your experiences with quantities of 3 and quantities of 2, and if I don't understand how you can affirm the truth value of the number 3 is greater than the number 2 unless you believe that there is a number 2, there is a number 3, and because you think that being and existing are the same, that they exist. I just don't see.
Wait, no,
I mean,
I
I
think
got you to say earlier that if something has any properties whatsoever, then it must be.
no, I don't think you got me to say that earlier. I was
Oh
just
yeah,
discussing
that's a
bundle
pretty
theory.
clear principle. How could something have properties unless it is, unless it, on your view, unless it exists?
Right, no, but you've got it sort of, you put in the cart before the horse there, right? Because if something exists, then it has properties. Just because you can talk about some subsisting thing, which I wouldn't agree with, it doesn't necessarily mean that it somehow is, because the thing that you're trying to denote has properties, right? I could make up all sorts of things, um, and just assert that these things have properties. That doesn't mean that they exist or subsist. It just means that do you see what I mean? You're putting the cart before the horse, right? Because all
I
things that
thought your
exist
whole
have properties.
challenge was based on predicate logic, and you can't say that something has a property at all unless you're willing to put it into the existential or ontological quantifier.
Oh wait, well that's exactly what Russell was doing with the Bold King of France, right? So he was saying that it's an untrue proposition because the thing that it's denoting does not exist, right? That was the whole point, right?
Are you talking about the present king of France, or are you talking about the proposition that that king is bald?
Yeah, well, if you have the proposition that the present king of France is bald, but there's no present king of France, then it's just not denoting anything existent. So it's the proposition is false. That's like the whole point of Russell's solution there, right? That was like a groundbreaking solution in predicate logic to demonstrate this, right? On denoting, it was called the essay.
So I mean, you can deny, you can say, but when he says the present king of France does not exist, he's not um, he's not attributing to the present king of France any properties.
Well,
I mean,
this is
he's giving it the, like, it's conceptually entailed that the present king of France is the present king of France, right? That's just like the law of identity. Um, but when it comes to the number 3 being greater than the number 2, that's not conceptually entailed necessarily.
Wait, I think you might be misunderstanding slightly the what Russell was doing there, right? So he's saying for everything that is the current King of France and everything of that which is also bold, then it has a truth value, right? But there isn't the quantity of things which are the present King of France is 0. So that's what's being said there, right? Just in case you were saying something a tiny bit weird there. It's saying that the quantity is 0.
Yeah, denying that there are any such things, that anything instantiates that set of properties.
Yeah, so it doesn't mean that magically that now becomes subsistent because it's used that there's a quantity of
And say
0
that the present
of
King of France would subsist.
well, him being present or something like this would be a like, are you trying to
This is
say that
another
being
case where
present would be a
you're
property?
sort of not you, sorry, I don't mean to say it like that because that always sounds accusatory. But if someone says, someone asks me, what do you think about the present King of France? I say there's no such thing as the present King of France. I don't have to say that the present King of France is a non-existent object, because we can make a distinction between two ways. Let's say a definite description can fail to refer. So it can fail to refer to an existing object and succeed. This is still the first one. It can fail in referring to an existing, but succeed in referring to a merely subsisting, or it can fail altogether. It can fail to refer to either thing. So I
Right.
think that in the second class, you would have things like the present King of France. You would have things like the round square.
Well,
And go ahead.
well, you just literally said a minute ago when you started that train of thought that someone would just say, yeah, it doesn't exist. You don't need to say that there is a non-existing object. And exactly,
Agree.
right?
No,
So
right.
you're
But
yeah,
no,
yeah, but
but
that's just going against the debate proposition, right? You're
no,
arguing
no, no,
against
no, no,
yourself.
no, no. I'm not. No, I'm not. You're misrepresenting a little bit. So saying that the present King of France does not exist uh, has, the reason that we want to say that there are some terms which succeed in referring to a non-existent object, that is, fail to refer to an existing but succeed in referring to a merely subsisting, is because of a combination of intuitions that we already have about what these how we use these phrases, and whether we can continue to talk meaningfully about certain things unless we posit such a distinction.
Yeah, but Russell rejects the concept of subsistence, right? So you can't use a
Well,
Russellian
at
account.
one point he does, but
We,
at another point he actually endorses subsistence. But this is irrelevant.
Well, I feel like in the era of the on denoting essay, if
Yeah.
you're using a Russellian account of existence, you can't then invoke subsistence because it would be arguing against the position which is supporting your case, right?
Right. I'm not a Russellian.
Sure, but I think it's the more parsimonious of the two theories, right? So if we just take a Meinongian perspective, and say that there's this infinite realm of infinite subsisting things versus that's nonsense, there's no such thing, things simply exist or don't. What is the more parsimonious? Of
Well,
course, that is the more
it's more
parsimonious explanation to say
parsimonious,
that.
but is it
Sure.
is
So
it
then you
as
fall victim
fruitful?
to
Can you talk about? No, you have to be able to make as much sense out of um, the sort of things that we find value in talking about, and that we
yeah,
think
sure.
that a theory of language should actually be able to explain.
You don't have any problems doing that. So in
Well,
that,
you
in
can't even tell me that the number 3 is greater than the number 2.
I can, of course I can, because I just index it to
No,
carrots
there
or
are no
index
numbers.
apples. Like,
No, that's
well,
a case where there are more carrots than carrots in a certain case.
yeah,
You can't talk to
it's
me
indexed.
about the number in Russell's view.
It's indexed. Like, for example, if you want to start talking about moral propositions and you're divorcing the moral propositions from the human beings who they're actually affecting. That doesn't make any sense. That's just nonsense, right? If you're trying to do that. But this is why we index things to other things so we can conceptualize it. And when we're children, this is what we do. This is the way that children grow up and the way that children learn. It's only when we're adults we sort of skip a step a bit. And it's the same with language. In the case of when I learned the German language, I'm sitting there staring at the page, trying to make sense of the words on the page and trying to remember, how does this word work in a sentence, and is it dem or is it der or is it das or d? Is confusing. I don't get it. But after time, you just start picking it up and start learning and start sort of shortcutting it. So you create shortcuts in your mind. But that doesn't mean it's not indexed somewhere at the back of your head to something in reality, right? When I learn a word in German, I'm indexing that word to something. It's denoting a pen or paper or something like this. It's denoting something. But if I learn a word which I couldn't denote to anything, it fails to it fails to be something which I can have in my head. So all of these fictional things that you're saying that subsist, these are just sort of mutants of things which I can denote in the real world. So when you describe me Pegasus, I can just think of a horse, and then I can think of a bird, or I can think of whatever other features it has and just glue them together and sort of know what you mean. But that's not because the concept subsists, right? That's nonsense. I'm just bolting together things in my mind which actually do exist. If you were to describe something to me which I couldn't use existing things in the world to get to picture in my mind, then I wouldn't be able to do it. You'd just be talking nonsense again. So this is the reason why I'm quite repetitive with the word nonsense, because I'm just trying to demonstrate, well, not demonstrate, but point out what is sensical and what is not sensical. Right? I'm not saying nonsense in a derogatory way or something like this. I'm literally just pointing out what is sensical and what is not. So I just don't really see how it's a problem for a Russellian account of objects, and I see huge problems on your side of how unparsimonious it is. It's a subject to Occam's razor, and then your whole concept of objecthood just crumbles when we start talking
Okay, I mean,
about
let's
monsters
go
under
one
my
at a
bed.
time. Let's go one at a time, because you're going to make this accusation that it crumbles, and I'm not even going to be able to get to it until later. So let's talk first about the point here about sense and nonsense. So, I mean, we can have this account where we can't, where sort of all we are ontologically committed to are what then? Properties, particulars, and what exactly is it on Russell's view? It's been a while since I took philosophy of language. It's like properties, particulars, and like
What
logical relations.
what do you mean? You're talking about proper nouns and definite descriptions and so forth?
Like what on your view of existence, what exists? Like numbers don't exist.
Well, numbers are
What
indexed to things in the real world.
that doesn't tell me whether they exist.
Yeah, sure. They don't exist. Like they're not.
They don't
If I
exist. Okay.
a statue of the number 3, then that exists, right? But the statue exists, but the number, the abstract concept doesn't exist. Like concepts, like that's not
So
something that
are
exists
there
or
any
subsists.
do any abstract things exist?
Well, it's just our mind producing illusions of things. Well, not illusions, like the Cartesian theatre, right? We have this sense of a Cartesian theatre, but I doubt you're a substance dualist, right?
Oh no.
You don't know?
No, I said no.
Oh yeah, exactly. So we have this sense of a Cartesian theatre, but we know that this is, or we agree at least, that this is probably not actually the case, right? So there's not a little man in our head, but we can take things from the real world and bolt them together, and that's our mind's work. But it's not saying that these things subsist. That's just saying something unnecessary. And
To say, so I mean, I'm definitely not committed to saying that like whatever we imagine subsists.
yeah, exactly. So if you're not committed to that, then there's absolutely no problems on my view to say that I bolt things together in my mind based upon things in the real world.
No, that's I don't. So wait, what I just said was I'm not committed to the proposition that if we imagine X subsists, then X subsists. And what you responded with was, right. So therefore, I mean, let's just go with my view. No, it doesn't follow because there's a lot of things that my view can do that your view can't do.
Oh, wait a sec.
Like,
I think there might be a bit of a leap there. I didn't say therefore my view was correct. I said therefore there are no problems with my view, because if my view can do everything that your view
okay,
can do
right. Well,
functionally, then there's
then
no problems.
well, that's the right. So I mean, functionally, what we said was pretty much equivalent because what I was alleging in the response was that my view can do things that your view can't, and that if your view can do the things that I can and that mine can in these contexts, specifically with regard to abstract um, entities and how we can discuss abstract concepts and stuff, then I think if your view is going to actually be able to affirm the sorts of truths that mine does, then ours aren't actually going to be very different, and yours is just going to be like mine. And you think that we have this inflated Minong's jungle when in fact no, because it's not taking up any space. It's really not that much of an inflated ontology. It's just being able to talk about things that we can't see in the empirical world.
Well, would that hold for a Christian biblical conception of heaven, right? So we've got heaven with all of the animals and people who have ever lived all in this heaven, and it somehow transcends time and space, and all the people are just in heaven and chilling out up there. And it just seems ridiculous. It just seems absurd to visualize even just to try and comprehend that. It just seems completely absurd. And I think most people who just think for 2 seconds what heaven would actually be like would come to the conclusion that it just seems to be complete bullshit, right? The concept of this realm of existence that transcends space-time, where every human and every animal and every ant that has ever lived and died is now in this realm or in some other realm called hell. It just seems like absurd nonsense. But
Well,
why
but
is that the so why could that not be absurd nonsense when we put it into the realm of subsistence?
in like, so how would my view deal with heaven and hell, for instance? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, how is it not equally absurd?
Well, it's more no more absurd than talking about any other fictional universe. I mean, these things don't exist in space time. It could be a fictional. So, like, say the Bible says that actually heaven does exist in a certain location in space, and that time does pass in heaven. Um, well, then it doesn't follow that like I'm gonna have to bite the bullet. It's like no, heaven is this either way. It's a fictional entity. It's a fictional um, you could yeah entity is probably the best word for it, a fictional notion, um, and either according to the fiction it's immaterial and atemporal, or according to the fiction it's material and temporal. Like, not that doesn't make it that it doesn't bloat my universe any more than it already is.
I just don't see how that's the case, and I see a further
I mean,
problem. I see a further problem with the sense of essentially what you're doing is you're having your cake and eating it. There's some sort of
that's my whole
contradiction
view
there.
as I'm having my cake and eating it, but without a contradiction. Yeah.
No, that is in itself a contradiction. You can't have a cake and eat the
I
cake
can play
because
with the phrase. I can play with the phrase.
right, yeah, but in the same way that that literally is a contradiction, there is a contradiction in your view, because what you're saying is
Huh.
your realm of subsistence transcends space-time. And in addition to that, there there is some sense of objecthood in the sense of, in your subsistent realm, you do have unicorns, you do have Pegasus, you do have Harry Potter, but this perception of Harry Potter and unicorns and Pegasus is completely contingent on some sensical conception of objecthood, in the sense of, if it was literally transcending space-time, then you would have to be a mereological nihilist in approaching this. So there wouldn't be a Pegasus. There would just be there would be energy, or there would be mereological simples. There would never be the possibility of having
completely
something.
compatible with mereological nihilism. It can't. If you're a mereological nihilist, you can be a Meinongian meta-ontologist in the way that I am, because all you're going to say is all that exists are particulars, and in talking about everything else, you just have these ideas that don't apply to this world of space-time and that merely subsist.
But then
And that's how you can make sense of our discourse about things like morality and science and math and all the things that we talk about. You can still be a mereological nihilist, on my view.
if you're being an actual mereological nihilist in respect to, in an ontological way, then you literally can't recognize Harry Potter. You couldn't talk of Harry Potter.
No, I mean, that's assuming that the mereological nihilist necessarily identifies being in existence. I see no reason to think they do.
But then it just doesn't make sense to have to talk about Harry Potter when Harry Potter doesn't occupy a space, and like, it just, how can you say on one
Why?
hand it transcends time and space, so space time doesn't apply to your world of subsistence, but also Harry Potter, Pegasus, and unicorns exist, which
No, they don't
are
exist,
concepts in time and space, or subsist as concepts,
and they're not in
which have
time or space.
which necessarily are derived from a perception of space, time and space. You can't have something like a unicorn or a horse. Just take a normal horse. If there was no time and space that the horse could be conceptualized within, then you couldn't have the idea of a horse. It would just be mereological, like a bag of mereological simples, which was unintelligible. So your view just has the complete unintelligibility in
I mean,
your
I
subsistent
think
realm.
I think I already answered this with the discussion of heaven, because you can say according to the fiction that heaven is material, or you can say according to the fiction that heaven is immaterial. Neither of those makes heaven material. So I mean, it's you can say according to the fictional universe in which Pegasi, right, or Pegasuses exist, they have a physical existence in this fictional existence that they have, but that's not existence. That's just their subsistence.
Right. So I'm still not seeing how you can get away from the fact that your world has no time and space conceptualization, but you can arrange particulate matter in a way which is contingent on space time. It's a contradiction. I don't see how that's the
It's
death blow
not
there to your view.
that was not a contradiction. You're going to need some further premise about
Sure. I'll get.
about the constraints, but I mean,
I'll
like,
generate for you the contradiction now in
sure,
propositional logic, just off the top of my
sure.
head. So my conceptualization of Pegasus depends on space-time. I don't have space-time, therefore I cannot have Pegasus. I cannot have Pegasus. I do have Pegasus, which
Wait,
is the proposition and its negation,
can you go a
derived
little
from a
slower?
conclusion.
I got lost because there was a little jumping around. Can you go ahead?
Oh no, there was no jumping around. It was a polysyllogism
No, I
with
think you might have used existence where on this mereological nihilism where you are a Meinongian, you needed to use being. I
okay,
think.
so I'll
Can you
put it
try it
in.
again?
I'll put it in debate chat. This is literally just off the top of my head, man. I'm just freestyling this.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd just be like modus tollens and then deriving the contradiction from the conclusion of the modus tollens, right? So
I mean, I'm just gonna add here, like, if it turns out, right, like that this doesn't work, it only shows that there are no non-existent objects if you're a mereological nihilist. It doesn't show that there's no non-existent objects. I'm just, I haven't explored it in depth, but I mean, if this challenge works, let's see. No, I don't accept that a square circle subsists. Verbal. Where is the? Oh, it's in. Is it serious or general? I don't see. Are you still typing it?
Yeah, I'm still typing it now. So I didn't push the
No
button because I
worries.
was
It's in
typing.
debate chat. Okay, got you.
Yeah, it's in debate chat. I'm just doing the last premise now. I'm about to hit enter, and there's loads of typos. Just ignore that. I'm typing it quick. Something like this. This is just off the top of my head really quickly. So, do you want to? Shall I read it out loud, or do you want to read it yourself?
So this is attempting to refute mereological nihilist Meinongianism, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So my conceptualization of Pegasus is contingent on space-time. I don't have space-time. Therefore, I can't have a conception of Pegasus. You're saying, there's a C1 and then a P3. Is that supposed to go that way, or are you saying?
Yeah, it's
I
a
cannot.
polysyllogism, but I've not got to I've not derived the conclusion because there's a contradiction in the premise of P3, right? So all I'm doing is demonstrating the contradiction of a premise. So I'm deriving the conclusion C1, I cannot have Pegasus, and putting it into the proposition I have Pegasus, and C1, I cannot have Pegasus. So I'm just demonstrating the contradiction there. Maybe I can do that in a better way, but
Well,
you can see
I
the
don't see. I
proposition.
mean, I don't see how any of these claims could be evaluated as true on a mereological, like, nihilist view.
Well, wait. So you're rejecting P1 then?
Um, no, wait, no, yeah, no, that was wrong. Let me see this. My conceptualization of Pegasus is contingent on space-time. Yes, in the same way that, like, anything I do is contingent on space-time.
Yeah, sure.
I
So
I
you
don't.
accept P1.
Yeah, but I don't have space-time. Why not?
I mean, so I wrote it quickly, but the meaning of P2 is in your subsistent realm, there's no such thing as space-time, right? It transcends space-time. So in your subsistent realm, there's no space-time. Maybe I can just edit that quickly.
So this is the version of Meinongianism where all that exists are particulars in the void or whatever, and subsistence, all other things, right? So like my concept of self, like any language, any terms, anything, those are just going to be subsistent, right?
Well, I don't know what you want to put in your subsistent realm. I think the whole concept of subsistence is silly, which is why
Okay,
I'm
well,
arguing
yeah. So
against
this
it.
is this is why I would have that if you want to be a Meinongian and a mereological nihilist, you would have to say all that exists are these particulars, but we all of the stuff that, like, this would be the way that I would couch the view, was like all of our ways of understanding things, even like our things that we normally think of as empirical and that exist in space time, would have to fall under subsistence, because this is just that kind of view. You don't have any other. Nothing else can be in the realm of existence. So your conceptualization of Pegasus being contingent on space time, that would, the only sense in which that would be true is in the sense in which your conceptualization of anything, or even, I mean, your existence would be contingent on space time, because everything is going to ultimately be contingent on the existent in this sense of the mereological nihilist view. I don't have space time in my subsistent realm,
Well,
But
look,
you have a conception of space-time.
yeah, you have a conception of space-time which you're applying to the subsistence realm, but you're then saying that the subsistent realm doesn't have space-time. So you're having your cake and eating it in the problematic sense of that expression.
I mean, uh, I, you,
I really
I'm
think this is a
saying that
downgrade of your
I'm
position, man.
conceptualizing. I have a conception of space-time.
Sure, but you can't
It
import that
doesn't mean.
you can't import that into your subsistent realm because you're asserting that your subsistent realm is free of space-time. It transcends space-time. So to say that there's a monster under my bed is not possible or difficult, or there's some weirdness to that
Okay,
for you
I
to
mean,
say that that's
I
a thing.
shouldn't have even I really shouldn't have even entertained the mereological nihilism thing because I had never thought about it until you brought it up. So I'll just say I deny mereological nihilism. I still think that my view um, is going to give us reason to think that there are some things that, on your view, don't exist.
Okay, so if you've avoided one horn of my challenge to your theory,
I
that, that
mean, this was really never a horn of the challenge. Like, this is me going down a road I shouldn't have gone down, but now I'm back. And you didn't give me my actual view a challenge. I was just entertaining the mereological nihilist view. But
wait, you have to have some sort of view, and that was the road you were going down because it indicated it seemed to you at the time like it got you out of problems, but now you've seen that it
how did
leads
I say it got me out of? How did I say that the mereological nihilism view got me out of problems?
because you're saying that the subsistent realm transcends space-time, but now you're saying, oh no, it doesn't. Actually, space-time. I go back on that, and I concede that there is actually space-time in my subsistence
No,
realm.
where did I
Otherwise, I
say
can't
that?
have.
No, I didn't.
Well, then you're just subject to the syllogism that I just wrote out,
No,
dude. You,
this
like you.
syllogism only applies to someone who believes in mereological Meinongian nihilism.
Well, that's you right now.
No, it's not.
Well, how can you
You
get
said I
out of the
only
problem,
believe
dude?
in so the mereological nihilist only believes in like particulars, the existence of just like mere particulars, like doesn't believe in the existence of persons, doesn't believe in the existence of um books, chairs, any of this shit, right?
Well, that's why. Right. So I'm a meteorological nihilist when it comes to what lies beyond the limits of my perception. Right. So then when Wittgenstein says, um, uh, from what does he say exactly? It slipped my mind. But we must remain silent. Right. Of that
One
we
cannot
cannot speak.
speak,
We
one
must.
must remain silent.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. So I can't transcend the limit of my world. Right. So if I try to transcend the limit of my world, then I become a meteorological nihilist, necessarily. There can only be meteorological simples. I can say das Ding an sich seems to exist, probably, I guess,
How
but
can you
then
why are you justified in even thinking that there are mereological simples?
it seems to be the case. I'm not wedded to the idea. If it's
Well,
not the
if it
case, then I
seems to
don't
be the
care.
case, why can't I just have the one that seems to me to be the case? I don't see that there's any rational justification for believing in mereological nihilism over not believing in mereological nihilism.
Wait, all I'm giving you is a transcendental idealist account of reality, right? All I'm saying is idealism, and when we try and transcend the boundaries of our world, then we just get to mereological simples, or maybe nothing exists if you're an empirical idealist. But if you're a transcendental idealist, you would be saying, yeah, something exists. Das Ding an sich exists somehow, I guess, but I don't really know what it is. I can't talk about it. Wittgenstein would say we have to remain silent about it. So the thing that we have to remain silent about we would have to be a meteorological nihilist in respect to. But you're saying that your subsistence world transcends space-time in a similar way to Das Ding an sich would transcend space-time. So you have to remain silent about it because you can't. What you're going to say, like with Pegasus, you're going to say that there are particles arranged horsewise, right? So meteorological simples arranged horsewise.
No,
But what
no, no.
is
I'm not going to talk about that with Pegasus because Pegasus is an immaterial object.
well, how are the particles? How is it arranged? How
It
is the
doesn't have any
atom?
particles. It doesn't
Well,
have any particles. It
what?
doesn't exist in space. It's not a. It doesn't exist. It's not a space-time being.
So you're saying that Pegasus, if we were to imagine Pegasus having atoms like another horse, it doesn't have atoms, or what's
No,
going
you
on
can
there?
imagine it to have atoms, but it
Well
doesn't have
then,
atoms.
well then it has atoms if you're imagining it having atoms, right? You
No,
can't.
that does not fit. No, if I imagine that X is a duck, it doesn't make X a duck.
No, I mean in your subsistence realm, like we're talking merely about your subsistence realm here, right? So in your subsistence realm, we have Pegasus, and I think of Pegasus having atoms. Well, in your subsistence realm, then Pegasus has atoms, right?
No, because atoms are physical physical constructs, and I told you that Pegasus is not a physical thing.
So your view denies me thinking about Pegasus of having atoms. I can't
No,
conceptualize that.
you can think about it that way, but it wouldn't be true that it is that way.
Yeah, so what you're saying there is, no, you can't you can't say that Pegasus has atoms in my subsistent world. Well, if I'm imagining it, isn't that it the thing which is subsistent? Isn't that the non-existent object that you're trying to refer to? Like it seems like
No,
you're
I
contradicting
told you that.
yourself.
No. Oh, no. No, I told you that what exists are physical and psychological entities, right?
Okay. So you're saying that if I
An
conceptualize something,
abstract entity is not a psychological entity.
so if I imagine Pegasus, Pegasus doesn't subsist. That's not good enough for your subsistence.
Pegasus, if you just imagine something on your own, right? You just start thinking about something, then I don't think it subsists necessarily. No, why should it subsist?
Well, that's a problem for your view
Depends
because
what it
then,
is.
well, then
Like
there's some.
I'm imagining like a guy who looks like me, but he has a shaved head, right? I don't have to say he subsists.
Well, if you don't, then you can't talk about him, and then you run into the same exact problems that you're saying that my view has.
No,
So you
no. Oh my
that
God,
that 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 that
I don't
that
like
that
the
would be
quick sleight of hand sophistry here, man.
no,
Like, take
no.
it a
There's
little
no
slower.
sophistry.
Take it a little slower,
There's no
and think about
sophistry.
it.
I can run you through this step by step. There's no sophistry happening here. What's happening is I dealt you the death blow to the mereological nihilism view, and now
A view I
you've
didn't believe, by the
you've
way.
taken that back. Okay. Well, you've taken that back now. So I'm saying, okay, well, if you take that view back, then here's another death
Let's hear
blow
it.
to
Let's
that
hear
view.
it.
And yeah, I'll spell it out for you in a slower way, I guess. Maybe I went too fast there. So you're saying that for something you require subsistence because otherwise we can't talk about fictional things.
Not just
We
fictional
can't talk
things.
about
Not just
well,
fictional
yeah,
things.
and other things as well, but we would be unable to talk about fictional things, you claim, if we don't have this sense of subsistence. So
Well, we could
you've just
talk about
said,
them, but we couldn't say that they were true. I don't know how we could say that they're true.
so we can talk about everything, but it just comes down to saying they're true or not. Is that like the only function that you think is like a feature
Actually,
of
no. Well, I
my
mean,
Leninist
because
view?
if you're gonna if like I'm granting like this kind of just like a predicate and logic analysis of propositions, and so um like whether we can in some sense talk about something on that view, as long as we just stipulate whatever variables we need, your metaphysics is not going to tell you whether you can talk about things, right? Your metaphysics is going to tell you whether those propositions can be true.
Well, if you're saying the only function is a truth function, then we can just collapse the conversation into a theory of truth conversation, and then you're going to really struggle defending some coherent theory of truth of flying horses and various other things like that, right? So I think that's going to be even more difficult for you than just biting the bullet on the mereological nihilist point, because otherwise, if you don't bite the bullet on being a mereological nihilist um, in respect to subsistence, then you're running into problems of the monsters under my bed and all these weird things
I
which you
still
were
have no
previously
idea what you're
rejecting.
getting at with these monsters under your bed. Like the fact that you imagine there to be a monster under your bed does like it is entailed within your imagination of it that it couldn't subsist because you've given it a location. You can imagine it to have a location, but it can't have a location. It's pretty simple.
Right. So there's a fairy tale book where someone writes, "There is a monster under my bed. There's 2 monsters under my bed, 3 monsters under my bed. There's a book about monsters under my bed." And then I say to you, "What did the book say about the monster under the bed? Is it true that there was a monster under the bed?" And you say, "Yes, it's true that there's a monster under the bed." Well, by doing that, by guessing the truth function extracted from the monster under the bed bedtime story, you're then committed to saying that the monster under
How
the
many
bed
times
subsists.
do I have to say this, dude? I've literally said this like 6 different times. If I say, according to this story, there's a monster under the bed, that doesn't mean that the monster or the bed or anything have existence in space-time. That there's no space-time. There is the fictional universe, and the fictional universe either like presupposes or doesn't presuppose space-time. Doesn't mean that it is uh, that is in space-time.
Okay, so I sense you're getting a bit frustrated because you're repeating yourself.
I've just said this. Yeah, I've said this so many times.
Yeah, yeah. You're saying you said it 6 times or whatever, but the reason why we're going back on this point and going round in a bit of a circle on this point is because this is devastating to your position, right? And you
I'd love
don't
to
seem
see
to be
how it's
getting.
I'd love to see how it's
Yeah,
devastating.
I'm trying to spell it out, but it doesn't seem like you're getting the potency of this point, or you're not conceptualizing why this is a problem for your argument when it is a huge problem, right? So I'm going to try and spell it out in the easiest possible way with the least possible confusion. So either you can say time space exists or time space doesn't exist in this subsistent realm. They're the two possibilities.
You're using exist. That's very, the whole thing is about whether
Okay,
those things
subsist.
exist.
Sorry, that was just I just said the wrong word. So either things subsist in your subsistent realm with a sense of time space, or without a sense of time space, unless you want to do some sort of weird law of non-contradiction thing, right? Which I don't think we need to entertain. If you say, okay, time space doesn't exist, doesn't subsist, well, it's not part of the subsistent realm, it doesn't make sense in this subsistent realm, then you would be committed to a mereological nihilist view and
How?
objecthood. I've explained multiple times, but we can explain again. If you didn't have a conceptualization of space-time, you'd be unable to talk about the shape of something, the form of something, whether Pegasus has wings, because what are wings if they don't take a form? I can't imagine what a horse would look like with or without wings if it didn't have a form to it. How can you imagine a formless horse? It's impossible. It doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
either you need to have a concept of form, in which case you cannot be a mereological nihilist in this subsistence realm. And then if you're not a mereological nihilist in the subsistence realm, and you're granting space-time in the subsistence realm, then you're going to run into all weird Myonian jungle, unparsimonious, infinite
No,
amount of
right.
beings
So what
in space-time.
in space-time, right? That's the thing is, but I really don't think that these are the only two logical possibilities, because what you said is the first one is I just need a conception of space-time, right? Or you said if you're denying that there's any, I think you said sense in which an abstract object can have spatial properties, right? So I mean, this works for like this applies to fictional objects in particular, fictional characters in particular. Um, but I don't see how this stuff. Just to um, preface, I'm not trying to weasel around here. I just want to make it clear first that um, the argument you're making, if it did work, it wouldn't apply to things like numbers and relations and properties. But I don't think it works. And so I don't think it works because the first, so let's say it's a dilemma, right? So the first horn is um, you admit that you can't, or is you say that you would need a conception of space-time to have a conception of something like a Pegasus. But there's no space-time in subsistence by definition. So there's no fictional characters that, you would need to conceptualize in formal, um, using formal concepts. Is that accurate
Yeah, either you
for the
have
first horn?
form or you don't have form. So the first horn is you don't have form. The first horn is you are a mereological nihilist in respect to space-time, and then you don't have form. The second horn is, okay, you do have space-time and you do have form, but then you have all of the issues of it being unparsimonious and all of the issues of monsters under my bed, etc. So they're the two horns of the dilemma, yeah.
Okay, so when you say form, you mean like what exactly do you mean by form? Because uh I can conceptualize Pegasus using uh formal, right? Like if I want to have like a picture of Pegasus, or if I want to think about Pegasus like going out in the world and doing what Pegasus does in its fictional universe, then I'm going to, of course, be conceptualizing it formally in like a space-time sense. But what Pegasus is at bottom is a fictional character, and fictional characters don't have material form. We conceptualize them as having, we imagine them to have physical form or space-time ish, whatever, however you say that form, but they're fictional characters. They don't have these things. In the same sense that, you know, the abstract object, the type, Plato's Republic, um, Plato's Republic itself doesn't have form. Now, different versions of printed versions or digital versions of different tokens of it um, will have form. And if I just was conceptualizing it, it would have to have form. But Plato's Republic itself doesn't have form.
Right.
It's an abstract entity.
So what you're doing here, as I raised before, is having your cake and eating it in the sense of space-time, right? So you're saying, right, so my subsistent realm doesn't have space-time, but I'm just going to import space-time into the conceptualization process of subsistent entities, right? So
In
you're
how
just
I
saying,
imagine them, because they're fictional. I just you have to. There's necessarily a degree of imagination that goes into making them the kinds of things they are. But like if I imagine that Harry Potter has glasses, it doesn't follow that Harry Potter has glasses. Harry Potter is a fictional like character who has his having glasses doesn't mean the same thing as it does for a material object to have glasses.
yeah, but you could just be like, if you were an idealist, if you were an empirical idealist or a subjective idealist in regards to this conversation, then you would have difficulty distinguishing Harry Potter in your mind from Harry Potter in the real world. Like, what is the real world? Like, where is the line of the real world then? And then you're going to run into all sorts of issues. So, what you're doing, as I've pointed out a couple of times now, is you've got no sense of space time in the subsistent realm that you're positing. But
Well, that's not quite true. Like I'm not. I don't have no sense in the Phrygian like sense of sense, because whenever I conceptualize or imagine these things, if I'm thinking about something that like in a sort of like representational like picture image sense, then of course I'm going to conceptualize it formally, and so there will be a sense of form, but it doesn't follow that whatever I'm conceptualizing is itself material.
so space time has applicability to your subsistent realm, but you're denying the
No, not
applicability,
applicability. That's a weird word for it.
or however you want to imagine space time within your subsistent realm. Because if you have this subsistent realm where you can imagine unicorns and things like this, then that necessarily entails that you have an understanding, a conceptualization of form, of time, space-time, and are you then importing it from outside of the world and simply like inserting
In
it into the world, or
the
does it?
fictional universe, yes. I don't think that would be true of relations, properties, and numbers.
But it just seems then that you're having your cake and eating it. You're saying that the world isn't subject to space-time, but I'm going to
You mean
subject it to space-time.
no? Subject is the wrong word there, because I would never say it's not subject to. Well, it's not subject to space time de re. It's subject to, the creator of the fictional world and the interpreters of the fictional world's conceptions of space time. But it's not subject to space time in the sense that, like, necessarily, I'm subject to space time because I'm decaying and I'm going to die. Like, that's not true of a fictional character. It could be true according to the fiction that the character will die at some point.
Okay, so I'm going to spell out the
But I mean,
the
wait,
issue I'm having.
can I say something? Because I feel like we've been talking about fictional characters for like an hour, and I don't think that these are anywhere near the strongest reasons to believe in my view. And the proposition is that there are non-existent objects. And so if you don't want to say that there are fictional characters, I don't think that I'm going to convince you of that at this point. Like, can we move to the more pressing cases?
Well, I just feel like I've got you cornered on this point, and now you're wanting to move on
Well,
without
no,
addressing
okay,
it.
so no, I mean, so you don't have to be convinced by what I said. For the purpose of this argument, I can say I'm agnostic about whether there are fictional characters. That doesn't mean I'm agnostic. I'm still going to say that there are non-existent objects. They would be previously existing objects, numbers, properties, relations, and the like. Because the
Right. So
proposition is not, you know, what I said at the beginning of the debate, those are the non-existent objects. The proposition is just there are some non-existent objects.
right. So we can move on, but I don't feel like we've sufficiently wrapped up my objections here. Because if you're just gonna like abandon this pathway and say, "Oh, I'm gonna try something else," right? Are you just gonna throw another thing at the wall? Then
Okay, wait, sorry,
we,
sorry, one sec. My headphones just said battery low. Please charge now. I'm gonna probably grab my brother's if I can. I mean, these will still last like at least 20 minutes. But
I
sorry,
think we should
because
wrap it up because it's getting late anyway. So we should probably try to address the ground that we want to address relatively quickly, and then give
I
closing
mean,
statements.
yeah. Well, I mean, shit. Yeah, it's been an hour and a half. I mean, I would. The problem would be that we would need everyone to come back, but I feel like, I don't feel, clearly you want to finish this, but I also haven't even gotten to really make my arguments against your view in terms of its insufficiencies with regards to what I saw as the main threat. I wasn't keeping track of time. That's my bad. If people, I mean, if we could somehow just like do a part two or something,
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess
that
we
would
could
probably.
do. I guess we can do a round two or something. But I guess, well,
Well, yeah, but then I don't know if it's necessarily fair, because the proposition, what we debated here was like, are there fictional characters? But the proposition was, are there non-existent objects?
but I think this issue applies to your view in general, right? So if I'm going to whittle down what you can say subsists and what doesn't, and I don't even think that it's a problem with just fictional characters. It's not exclusive to fictional characters, because you're going to have the same or even more weird issues with numbers and relations and the other things you want to get onto. I think it's the easiest thing to conceptualize with um, with fictional characters and stuff like this, because when we start talking about the ontology of a number, it's it's so vague and so weird that I don't even think we can talk about like what is the
That's
ontology of a number.
interesting.
That,
You
that
think that it's actually more vague than, like, I mean, because there are all sorts of problems with fictional characters. Like, when does um a character that I like made up, like doodling, like when does that, like, what's the difference between, just something I'm entertaining and something like a fictional character? Like, that seems like a problem for someone who's like super committed to um, a specific ontological view with fictional characters. Like, I do think there are fictional characters, and I think that my view can say that there are fictional characters. But I'm not like, it's definitely the one I'm like, would give up first.
Right. So yeah, but I think just if we're gonna debate and you're just gonna like jettison some of your beliefs along the way, don't see that as a robust position to take, right?
I mean, I made the like, if I wanted to debate just fictional characters, then I would have made that the proposition. But I'm not that confident in my ability to defend uh, just fictional characters. Like, I don't think that you refuted my view here, and I think that we've gotten to a point where we're just like, we disagree about this sort of intuitive notion of applicability of space time um,
Well,
in
it's a huge
subsistence,
problem
which,
for your view. It's just a huge problem for your view, so that's why I'm
well, I mean, I
sticking to
know
the
you
point.
see it as a huge problem for my view. I got that. Um, but you still, I mean, it was never formalized as a contradiction. It was formalized as a contradiction for the mereological nihilist version of this view, which I stepped into in a silly fashion. But I I mean, what did you want to say? Because I mean, you want to
You like
close
me
statements?
would you like
Is
me
that
to
what you're saying?
formalize would you like me to formalize the other horn of the view here? I could formalize that as well. If you wanted, I could come up with a syllogism for that as well. And so
Yeah,
then,
yeah. If
uh,
you think that it can be a convincing argument, then yeah, please, yeah.
yeah. So let me just think off the top of my head what we were saying with that. So we were saying that um, time space does exist, or not doesn't exist. Time space is a part of the subsistent realm, and if that is the case,
Right.
then we would have to be okay with talking about monsters under my bed being under my bed, um, and there would be an infinite amount of monsters under my bed, and yeah, so I could like formalize. I could come up with a syllogism for that now if you want me to. Otherwise, you could just like interpret that in natural language. But if you want, I can come up with a syllo right now if you want.
Yeah, okay. You can. I could also just read you something from, so I mean, I wrote my undergrad thesis on just like monogenism in general and trying to articulate a version, and I have like a a clear set of sentences that address this, not this exact example, but something very similar, where it's like someone is imagining that there's poison um in that, this, I'm imagining my uncle is poisoning my drink, right? So isn't there sort of non-existent poison in my drink, right? This merely subsistent poison in my drink. It seems like it's the same sort of example, right?
No, just say there's no poison in the drink. What you're saying is just nonsense. There's no. Where's the poison? There's no poison.
There's there's non-existent poison. It goes the example, and then you're saying the same thing, that there's non-existent monsters. It's the same sort of thing.
No, I'm just saying that uh, what you're denoting has a quantity of 0, right?
I mean, you have to formalize your version as the objection to my view first, because what you just said didn't sound like it would have been framed as an objection to my view. That sounded more like just how you would cash it out in your own terms, no?
Well, you've been appealing to linguistic intuition all along, right? And saying that, oh, well, this is just like if we want to talk the way that we talk, then we need a theory that supports that. It's like, okay, cool. Well, if someone said to me that, oh, I think my uncle's put poison in my drink, I'll be like, oh, where's the drink? And he'll be like, oh, there's not one or something. I'll be like, oh, stop talking nonsense then. It's
A
nonsense.
drink. There is a drink. We're stipulating that in fact there's no um there's no material poison in the drink. The way to try to lock me into a contradiction is to say that there is uh that there's like non-existent poison in the drink. But I mean, I sort of lost track of exact, so if can you just like formalize the what you wanted to be um the second horn?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll do that now then. I'll just need a second because if I'm going to write it out.
Yeah. I got you.
Okay, one sec.
Ah, shit. Hey, Harry. Harry?
Yeah, so just wait for him to get back. For anyone who's not reading the chat, his headphones died. But I'm just formalizing what he's asked me to formalize the second horn of his dilemma in the debate, and I'll have that shortly.
Yo, Harry? Can I use your headphones? Please?
There. This should be trying to connect here.
Yeah.
Do you know how to connect them?
Yeah. What are they called?
Badass ears.
Are they really? More or less. Here we go.
It has the right and the left ear.
Okay, so I just pasted the Silo into the chat. If you can hear me now with the headphones. Otherwise, I guess I'll just wait for you to.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
Oh yeah. Okay, cool. Did you see the Silo just paste it into debate chat?
Yeah. So I don't know if I mean a lot is going to turn on like how just exactly how we phrase each thing. There's a concept of time and space to the subsistent realm. I like to it, or like what I would say is we can conceptualize non-existent subsistent things in spatiotemporal terms. We can conceptualize them that way.
Sure. I just really quickly wrote this. So if you feel like that's the better way to interpret
Okay.
what I'm writing, then sure, I've got no problem with that.
Okay. And if I can conceptualize mere subsistence along spatiotemporal lines, then I can think about there being monsters under my bed which subsist. No, you can think about there being subsistent you can think about there being, because of the way that you like the way that what's it called, the way that it's related here, can you think about there being monsters under your bed which subsist? No, because I mean you're making under your bed prior and then saying that those monsters subsist. But if they have a fixed spatiotemporal location, then they can't subsist. You can imagine that there are monsters, and imagine that they have an existence under your bed, but you would be imagining that. It wouldn't be a material property of them or a spatiotemporal property of them that they're under your bed. And you see how the second premise frames it as though there are the monster is under your bed and subsists, rather than a subsistent
Oh, no,
monster which you imagine to be under your bed.
yeah, I see what you're thinking. No, that's not what I'm saying, right? So I'm not saying that they exist under the bed. I'm saying they subsist under the bed. So all
But
I'm
I
making,
already told you, you can't subsist at a point in space time.
so this is right. So this is where we go back to horn one then, right? So you're saying, okay, horn one. Oh no, I reject mereological nihilism. Okay, well then horn two. Oh well, no, they can't be under the bed because that's space time. Space time doesn't work in this subsistent realm. Okay, well then horn one. Oh no, but
Wait, what? Where
nihilism's
do you get?
false.
I
Well
mean,
then horn two.
wait, horn one. Horn one. Let me go back to horn one and see exactly what horn one says. It says your conceptualization of Pegasus is contingent on space time. Like, yeah, in the
We
sense
already
that my
agreed to that.
existence is contingent on space time. I don't have space time. Wait. Sorry. The first horn, as symbolized, is against mereological nihilism, and I don't believe in mereological nihilism. I'm pretty sure that as you're saying the dilemma, there would be a dilemma both for the mereological nihilist version of this view and for this one as well. No.
Well, I've got a defeater. The one above is a defeater for the mereological nihilist view, and the one that I've just made now, which we can discuss further if you want, is the defeater, or at least an objection to
Right. Okay.
other type of
So,
view.
but I
So there's
mean,
two horns there, and with two defeaters.
as I define my terms, right, subsistence is by definition, if X subsists, by definition, X cannot be under my bed.
It cannot. Or if you're saying that it subsists under your bed, you're not saying that it exists on your under your bed. You're saying it subsists under your bed, right? So I'm not trying to
It can't subsist. No, the phrase "under my bed," that's a spatiotemporal property. The difference is imagined to be under my bed.
Right. So if you're rejecting that I can have an entity which subsists with some reference to time space, and you're gonna like do what are you doing?
No,
You
no, no. I'm not
pleading? Are you
denying
doing
that.
are you doing special pleading for time and space? I don't understand how you're getting to say
No, I mean,
you're denying time and space in one context, but then not in the other. It seems a bit
no, because oh my goodness, man, this is the central thing. Is X. If X subsists, X does not exist in space-time, and it follows from that X is not under my bed. But it's still it's totally possible for me to imagine X to be under my bed.
You're saying that it cannot subsist under your bed, but you can have a subsistent entity which you can
Which
imagine.
you imagine to be under your bed.
Right. So that just seems like a weird wording to try and get around the problem now, right? But the essence of it is if there are beings which subsist and I can imagine them subsisting under my bed, and part of the concept of them as beings is that they are under my bed. They are the monsters under the bed. Then they must subsist under my bed. Otherwise,
No. because saying that something subsists under your bed is incoherent, because something doesn't subsist in a physical location.
then I can't have monsters under my bed at all. We can't say that it's true that I think there are monsters under my bed.
No, we can. It depends how you analyze the like extensional or intentional, I forgot the phrasing of like whether you can quantify in the intentional context. So it's like you could phrase it as X subsists and I imagine X to subsist and X is under my bed. Or we could put the X subsist and I imagine, and then you put the X's being the property of being under a bed within the content of the imagination. And so it doesn't follow that there's any that it has any spatio-temporal location
Then you're
because you
just saying
just
that
imagine it to be that way.
then you've just defeated your own position in regards to ghosts and other entities which we feel have spatio-temporal location, right? So I just feel like we're running into countless issues when you're trying to, in a way, I don't want to like come off like I'm being derogatory or something, but you're doing special pleading for what can and can't have time and space application in your conceptualization of subsistence. And it just seems like an incoherent theory. I present you two horns, and it seems like you're just flip-flopping between them, and we're not
Yeah.
making much progress. So I think we should probably wrap it
Well,
up
I mean,
because it's getting
we'll
late.
see what the people. I mean, hopefully that people have seen that I made a distinction here and that it wasn't respected. But sure, yeah, fine.
What do you mean your distinction wasn't respected?
I
No,
mean,
you,
what happened was I explained how the distinction worked in horn one, and you said, "Oh, well, that's going to lead you to horn two." And I explained how it worked there, and you said, "No, we're back to horn one."
well, that's what happens, right? That's
Well, so,
entailed.
I mean, we'll see. Well, if someone can explain to me how that happened in a way that, I mean, because you haven't shown me why I should think that is the case, and maybe it's like I'm caught up in the heat of the debate. You know, that's totally possible. I hope that's not the case, but I mean, yeah, we'll see.
Come on, I think a few people, or at least Verbal, said in the chat that that was a pretty. What do you say here? I'm just scrolling up. Like at least a couple of people recognized the two horns and the issues with it. So
If you're speaking, I can't hear you right now. Sorry, my phones are doing my headphones, but it's done now. Go ahead.
okay, sure. Yeah, I was just saying a couple of people in the chat picked up on that. So I think maybe we can have a conversation after and go through it. Maybe someone else can explain it. Maybe I'm not doing a good job at explaining it in a way that you're understanding it. But it seemed that Verbal, at least, and possibly other people on here understood the objections. So yeah, I think we should go to close
Right, yeah.
and we can and
I don't
of
need
course,
any statement. I mean, we can have another debate on the other topics next time. I don't need a closing statement.
sure. I don't want to feel like you've wanted to discuss more, but I literally
No,
need
it's
to
late
go
where
to bed.
you are. Yeah, I got you. It's fine.
Yeah, it's like 11 p.m. So I think we should wrap it up. We can continue at a later date,
Right.
but
Part two
to
sometime. Yeah.
make this sure, just my closing statement. You can make one if you want. Otherwise, I'll just make one. I feel like we've got into two horns of a dilemma. One horn I made a syllogism for, and the other one I formalized as well, which you can still see in the chat there on the screen. And I feel like we're going backwards and forth between these two issues, which are central problems to the Myonian conceptualization of this subsistence realm. I think it's problematic. I think it's unparsimonious. And for me, it doesn't make sense. And there's just as much explanatory power not using a subsistence realm. So that's the way that I feel. I think that, Dion has been a great debate opponent, and I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
And,
I'll just say one thing real quick. I thank you very much, Footsoldier. It's been definitely, you know, you challenged me on some good points. I do think that that we have good reason to believe all sorts of things subsist. I don't even like. I really don't like that word, but now me even just saying that sounds like I'm fleshing. That there are things that don't exist is the way that I prefer to put it. There are things. There are fictional characters. Fictional characters don't exist. And I know that there are potential ways of of, how do you call it, explaining away fictional characters on, according to whichever, theory of language you use. I don't doubt that Footsoldier has a way to do it, but I don't think that his way of doing it would necessarily be, problem free. We didn't get to discuss that though. The other things, I think if you believe that it's true that Plato wrote the Republic, it's true that Harry Potter is a fictional wizard, and that Harry Potter does not exist, and that Plato does not exist despite being the author of the Republic, and you remember the examples I gave. I don't see how we can hold those statements to be true without saying that there are entities that possess certain properties, and among them the property of non-existence.
Well, let's continue that in the next chapter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice one, man.
It's been
Okay,
a pleasure. Thank you, man.
good stuff.
Yeah, great debate, guys. And to the audience that was here for at least 75% of it,